Okay, welcome back, everybody. After the break from the Chagim, I hope that you all had a suitably inspiring Tishrei. We're now in the month of Mar Cheshvan. Somebody told me, just as a by the way, I was always told that Mar Cheshvan was called Mar Cheshvan because it was a bitter month because there were no Chagim or anything like that. David Marks is nodding. But Ruby Stepansky told me something else this week. He said, no, he says that's a Bubba Maisa. He said the reason it's called Mar Cheshvan, and I've forgotten. I can't remember now what he told me. But he told me that it's not because it's Mar, because it's bitter. Blin Ada, I'll ask him tomorrow morning and I'll put it on the group what his answer was. Because it was something I'd never heard before. I can't remember what it was now, but I'll tell you anyway tomorrow. Right, back into Shmuel Bet Chapter 9. I'm going to put it on the screen straight away, and we'll do a little bit of recap so that we know where we're holding. Chapter 9 was a good. We actually stopped at the end of verse 8 in chapter 9. But chapter 9 was a good place to have stopped in a way because chapter 9 is a bit of a standalone chapter. The previous chapters, of course, had been about the glory days of David HaMelech, how far his kingdom had reached. And remember, we had our map, which showed us he went all the way into Lebanon, all the way into Syria, all the way into Jordan. And that was the end of that little episode. And chapter 9 is a much more personal chapter about David HaMelech, as opposed to a national story that we've been talking about in the previous chapters with the extension of the kingdom. So let's just recap what we did here by just reading, Jeffrey, if you will, verses 1 to 8 in the chapter.
This is chapter 7. Do you want me to read it from Art Scroll?
It's chapter 9.
Yeah.
Chapter 9.
Yeah.
And read me from Art Scroll, and then we can compare and see if there's any differences as we go along.
Is there anyone else who has survived the house of Saul, so that I may deal kindly with him for the sake of Jonathan? The house of Saul had a servant named Ziva, and they summoned him to David the king. The king said to him, "Are you Ziva?" And he answered, "I am your servant." The king said, "Is there any man at all left of the house of Saul, so that I may perform godly kindness with him?" Ziba said to the king, "There remains a son of Jonathan whose legs are crippled." The king said, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "Behold, he is in the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lo Debar." And King David sent and had him brought from the house of Machir, son of Amiel, from Lo Debar. Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came before David and fell upon his face and prostrated himself. David said, "Are you Mephibosheth?" And he said, "Behold, I am your servant." David told him, "Fear not, for I shall surely deal kindly with you for the sake of your father Jonathan. I shall return to you the entire estate of your father Saul, and you shall eat bread at my table continually." Mephibosheth prostrated himself and said, "What is your servant that you should pay attention to a dead dog such as myself?"
Stop there. Right, that's what we spoke about the last time we met 4 weeks ago. And if you want to go into that in detail, just listen to the recording, as I did last night, of what we spoke about, because we spoke about lots of things. I'll just summarize a couple of them, which are relevant. Mephibosheth was the son of Jonathan. He was lame. He was a cripple. He'd been sent out of the land. Remember, I showed you where Lo Debar was. It's on the other side of the Jordan River in what is today Jordan. He was shoved out of the way, as, of course, until not too recently, cripples weren't they? They were a bit of considered a shame on the family if you had a cripple and they were sort of, shipped in a institution or what have you. It's not that long ago that used to happen, even in our own lifetimes. So he was out of the way, Mephibosheth, and there was this chap Ziva. Here he is, Ziva. And it turns out from our discussion last time that Ziva is not a particularly good bloke. He's the butler. And what the butler has done is he has usurped the position of Mephibosheth. He stuck Mephibosheth over at somebody else's table. And it seems that he has appropriated or misappropriated, as it turns out, the property of Jonathan, property of Saul. Mephibosheth was the only surviving descendant, we think at this point anyway, of Shaul. And so what we see here in the beginning of this chapter, and this is what we stressed last time, the very first pasuk, read it again, Jeffrey, the very first pasuk of the chapter.
David inquired, is there anyone else who has survived of the house of Saul, so that I may deal kindly with him for the sake of Jonathan?
Okay, stop there. So what we see here, and that's why I said this is a personal chapter, we see David's character coming out again. We see over and over and over again that David is very, very hot. And we'll see it again, in fact, in the next chapter. He's very hot on repaying kindnesses. He, hakarat hatov is what we call it, recognizing good, being grateful to somebody for what they've done and repaying that kindness is a very, very strong feature of David HaMelech's character. Here, we have left off at the end of chapter 8, David at the peak of his glory, if you like. His kingdom has expanded. He is a powerful figure in the area, and he is sitting pretty. He did not need to go looking for Jonathan's children. He could have just, carried on being the king, being successful. But no, he remembered that he'd made a pact with Jonathan, that he would like that their families would be bound together. We're talking Macha Chodesh territory. Remember the Haftarah of Macha Chodesh, when it's Rosh Chodesh on a Sunday. This is the Haftarah. We went through it in great detail in earlier chapters. And at the end of that episode, Jonathan and David swear allegiance to one another, and they I need to mute. Somebody's not muted, and I'm getting feedback.
He's on the train.
Right, there we go. I've just muted it. Okay, sorry about that. So we get this pact between David and Jonathan, and now David wants to fulfill that pact. He says, right, now I'm okay. I've sorted everything out. The kingdom's in good shape. I want to keep my promise to Jonathan. Who is there left in the house of Saul that I can do kindness to for the sake of Jonathan? And then they find this Mephibosheth. And that's what we spoke about last time. And Mephibosheth was in this place called Lodabar, and he was eating at the table of Machir ben Amiel. One sec, Jeff. What does it mean, eating at the table of? It means that he is a guest at that table. He is the host is responsible for looking after him, and the guest is subservient to him. And that was Mephibosheth's situation, even though he was the only surviving progeny of Saul. Yes, Jeffrey.
He's also, through marriage, a nephew of David's.
Correct. Correct. He is indeed, and we'll come to that. We'll come to that in a minute. We'll come to that in a minute. Good point. Right, that's where we've got to. Now, this is new now. We stopped at the end of verse 8. Mephibosheth has been brought to David, and he said to him, and obviously he's frightened because, you know, why would you get called in front of the king? You're going to be frightened. What have I done wrong? You know, and especially since he knows that his grandfather Saul, everybody knows that Saul tried to kill David. Maybe Mephibosheth thinks that David has called for him to take revenge on his grandfather, because he's the only one left that he can take revenge on. And of course, that's why he's frightened. And David says to him in verse 7, Altira, don't be frightened. I'm not going to do you any harm. On the contrary, I'm going to do kindness for you because of your father. Don't worry about your grandfather who was trying to kill me. I'm more interested in your father, who was my closest friend, and we have a pact together. I'm going to do kindness for you. From here on in, you will be eating bread at my table, and I'll give you back all the land of Saul, your father. Now then, before we go on to verse 9, how come David has to give the land of Saul back to Mephibosheth? Why hasn't Mephibosheth got it in the first place? But before we answer that question, Hannah's got her hand up. Yes, Hannah. You're muted, Hannah.
Unmute. There's a better.
Yeah.
I've got a linguistic question.
Yeah.
Further down the line, we learn that there are other members of Saul's descendants of Saul who are alive. Therefore, my question is, when David says, "Is there anybody left from the house of Saul?" is he referring to Jonathan? Like to him, the house of Saul at the moment is Jonathan, or all of the house of Saul? Because, like I said, later we find out that there were other descendants of Saul's who are alive.
Okay, and let's unpack that. Who were the descendants of Saul that were alive, other than Mephibosheth?
The ones that he hangs for the later there's a story of where
the Givonim. For the Givonim, yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
and
fair question.
They were also descendants of Saul.
Yeah, fair question.
Another a comment, not a question, but a comment is that David's a descendant of Yehuda, and Yehuda, and through Yehuda, Boaz were very strong on doing the right thing, and because David's pact with Jonathan mentions in the pact that it will be for future generations too, that David will do no harm to Jonathan or his descendants. It could be at this stage that he's just looking for if there's any descendants of Jonathan, and he's using the house of Saul to mean Jonathan. That's the only way
I think that's a very fair and accurate and succinct summary. Excellent. I agree with that. I agree with that entirely. Something popped into my head then about that. Oh, of course, what I was going to say was, until you reminded me about the 7 people that get hanged. We'll come to that in another chapter. The female descendants of Shaul, of course, don't count because his own wife, Michal, was a descendant of Shaul. He's clearly only talking about the male descendants, and I think you're right that it must mean Jonathan, because in fact he says so, doesn't he? He says, for the sake of Jonathan. So yeah, I agree with that assessment, and it's a very good assessment. Thank you for that. Right, so now to my question, please. Why? Yes, David. Yes, David Marks. Can't hear you. It doesn't show that you're muted, but we can't hear you for some reason. No, we can't hear you.
All right, leave it till later.
Now we can. Now we can. Now we can.
Okay. I was just saying that Hannah's question is addressed and answered in Corin on page 288.
Corin on 288. Let's have a look. I've got it in front of me. Which bit?
Well, you can start with the first paragraph, and the last paragraph is very appropriate to what Hannah asked.
Right, I can see what it says, and I'm not going to go to it now because I'm coming to the same thing from somewhere else a bit later on. I'm going to talk about the names, which is in the third paragraph, and I'm going to talk about the relationships to the previous dynasty very shortly. Thank you for that. Right, so why is Saul's property not already in the hands of Mephibosheth? And why is it in the power of David to return it to Mephibosheth? In other words, what happened to that property of Saul?
Something to do with the butler? Something to do with the butler, maybe.
Something to do with a butler. That sounded like Peter. You must be
Yes.
iPhone. Are you iPhone, Peter?
Yeah, iPhone, yeah.
Yeah, you're iPhone. Okay. Right. It's something to do with the butler. Yes, I think it is something to do with the butler. Go on. Tell us a bit more.
No, you said he was a bit of a dodgy character, so I presume it was that he had something shady going on, and perhaps he had got some of the property of Shaul.
Okay, very good. Now I'm going to ask Jeffrey to read verses 9 and 10.
The king then called Ziva, Saul's attendant, and said to him, I've given all that belonged to Saul and all of his family to your master's son. You shall work the land for him, you and your sons and your servants, and bring in its produce to be bread for Micah, the son of your master, Mephibosheth, to eat. But Mephibosheth, son of your master Jonathan, shall always eat at my table. Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. And Ziba
Right, stop there. Right. Now then, let's unpack those two verses. There's a lot in there. So the king called to Ziva. Please note that David is referred to in this chapter as David in the beginning, right? Verse 1, David, not Hamelech David, just David. Why? Because this is a personal thing, as we said at the beginning, right? And then he's referred to as the king.
The king. Yeah.
The king. And then King David. Okay? And then David. If you look very carefully, all the times when he's called David, as opposed to the king or King David, these are when David is acting in a personal capacity. When he's called the king or King David, he's exerting his authority. And it's a brilliant, once it's pointed out, it's really quite obvious, but it's a brilliant piece of analysis to see that the author of Shmuel Bet here has very cleverly used the language to institute that. Now, verse 9, the king called to Ziva, not David, the king calls to Ziva, Saul's servant. Well, why are we told he's Saul's servant? We already know he was Saul's servant, because that is telling us very straight away what the hierarchy is. David's the king and he is a servant, right? And he says, all that belonged to Saul and to all his household, I've given to your master's son, right? And then verse 10, and you shall till the soil for him. Implication, Peter, implication.
He's a servant.
Yeah, he's a servant of Jonathan, yeah.
But implication.
He hasn't been doing up till now.
Yeah, exactly, Paul. Exactly. The implication is that he'd been tilling the soil for himself up until now. Now, if it would have said, if verse 10 would have had one extra word after the word and, if it would have said, and now you shall till the soil for him, you would have understood it much more clearly. But in fact, that's what it means. And you shall till the soil for him. Implication, up until now, mates, you've had a free run. This Nebuch Mephibosheth, who's a cripple, who's been sent off to some, distant place, Lo Debar, and you have had a free rein as the butler, right? You've had a free rein to till the soil belonging to Saul, belonging to Jonathan, which belongs to Mephibosheth, and you had it all your own way, and you've been able to chap the profits for yourself.
But he didn't kill him.
He didn't kill Mephibosheth.
Yeah, Ziva didn't kill Mephibosheth. He sent him off somewhere, which does surprise me. Then, if he was such a nasty character, why didn't he just kill him and be done with it?
Maybe we can answer that in a little while, Michael, when I take you to your favorite sefer in Tanakh, which is?
Yes, I know. Yamin.
Divrei Hayamim, correct.
Yeah.
I'm going to take you to Divrei Hayamim in a minute, and I'll perhaps answer that question there. So he's had it all his own way, this Ziva, but now King David says to him, the game's up, mate. You had a good run for your money, but now you are going to do what you're meant to do, you and your sons and your servants. And it tells us at the end of the pasuk, end of verse 10, he had 15 sons and 20 servants. This is a servant. What's a servant doing with 20 servants? It's all over for him anyway.
Slaves, though.
They might have been his staff. They might have been his staff.
They might, but that's
he might have been the overseer.
Yeah, he's not. The implication is clear that these were his servants that were serving him, because now it's all over.
When David, I haven't got a whole much in front of me, but when David asks about if there's any more survivors of the house of Saul, doesn't whoever's telling him about Mephibosheth say, and he eats at the table of, like he's subservient to somebody else?
Yeah, it does. Earlier on in the chapter, when he asks, wait a second, I'll tell you what happened. He asks, is there anyone left? And somebody says, yeah, there's Ziva, the servant, he'll know, right? They didn't even know Mephibosheth existed. They've shipped him away somewhere. And King David, his uncle, as was pointed out, right? His uncle by marriage, didn't even know he existed. He had to be Ziva, the servant, who said, oh, yes, there's a son left over there. So, and he eats at the table of Machir, meaning, and this we spoke about this last time, meaning, implication, you don't need to worry about him. He's taken care of. He's taken care of. He's a Nebuch, and he's taken care of by this Machir ben Amiel, and you don't have to worry about it. Below Davar, it's you don't have to worry about it. So that was a bit of a play on words, Peter, because Lo Davar is
it's an inconsequential place, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not spelt with an aleph; it's spelt with a vav. The lo is spelt. So that was a bit of a liberty I just took there, but it just popped into my head. So I'm glad you picked up on it. Below davar in Hebrew, for those who are not so familiar, below davar is an expression in Hebrew that means it's of no consequence. It's of no consequence. But it's not quite that, because the lo here is with a vav, not an aleph. But anyway, it's a nice idea, another little poetic license. So Ziva is the one who has to tell them about Mephibosheth. So nobody knows about this poor kid, right? Ziva's had the free reign of working the land, and no doubt he didn't work the land. He had his 15 sons and 20 servants doing it for him. And in verse 10, David says to him, verse 9 and 10, he says, it's over, mate. It's now going to be, you're going to do what you were meant to do, which is to be a servant to your master. which is Saul, Jonathan, Mephibosheth, that line. And not only that, Mephibosheth shall eat bread continually at my table. I'm not having him stipped out there at Lodavar. He's going to be at my table in Jerusalem. And I'm going to look after him. And all of that is in consequence of the pact that David and Jonathan made in Mocha Chodesh time. Okay. And so what does Ziva say? This is a very, very interesting pasuk, which I need your help with. Read it out for me, Jeffrey, verse 11.
Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so shall your servant do. David
Stop there for a
repeated.
sec. Stop there. That's fair enough, isn't it? Ziva says, all right, whatever you tell me, king, I'll do. No problem for that. Now, I heard you start to say something which I'm suspecting is in brackets. I haven't got an art scroll. Right, miss out the brackets, please. Miss out the brackets.
Mephibosheth will be eating at my table like one of the king's sons.
Stop there. Now, look at the screen, please, because my translation on the screen, which is the Chabad translation, does not have any brackets. And I'll ask Jeffrey in a minute to tell you what it says in the art scroll brackets. But the translation on our screen is an accurate and true translation of what the words say. Let me take you through it in Hebrew. Vayomer Ziva el Hamelech, and Ziva said to the king. Note, he's called the king here, right? Ziva is relating to him as the king. He doesn't say to David. He's not a pal of David's. He's a subject of the king. Kechol asher yitzaveh Adoni Hamelech, all that my master, the king, shall command, et avdo, his servant, i.e. me, kein yaaseh avdecha, so your servant, i.e. me, will do. I will do whatever you say. Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth ochel al shulchani, he will eat at my table, ke'achad mibnei hamelech, like one of the king's sons. Now that don't make any sense, does it?
It's not
What's the
what
problem with that, Michael?
I'll do
Michael
everything
Krause.
that you want. I'll do everything that you want, but I want to have control over Mephibosheth, so he'll eat at my table.
Yeah, what's going on here? You can't tell the king where Mephibosheth's going to eat. What is going on here?
It sounds as though he's being rebellious. He's being treacherous.
It does sound like he's being treacherous, doesn't it?
Will eat what?
It does sound like that.
Mephibosheth will eat at my table as one of the king's sons. Is, okay, I'm the king?
Yeah. What's going on here? What would the king's sons be doing eating at the table of a servant? Chutzpah, as you say.
Delusions of grandeur, yeah.
Delusions of
Actually,
grandeur.
Perhaps
Say that again, Paul?
in the Stein's it doesn't say quite that, because it says Mephibosheth has been eating at my table.
That's an interesting explanation. I hadn't seen that. Let's look at the Hebrew. What does it say? Mephibosheth ochel, in the present tense, is eating or eats at my table. Like one, that's a very good explanation. It's still a bit chutzpahdik, but it's starting to be explicable. Let me tell you what I mean by that. I hadn't seen the Steinsaltz because I haven't got it. I've got Steinsaltz here, but I haven't got it open. I've got the Koren open, so I haven't read up the Steinsaltz. So I think maybe what that means is this. I'll do everything that you say, but don't worry about Mephibosheth. He's eating at my table. In other words, I've looked after him nicely, and he's trying to sort of make himself out to be a Gutenki, which is not, because he shipped him out to Machir ben Amiel.
What he says.
One sec. Let me just finish this train of thought, Paul. And then maybe he's saying, maybe this is rubbish, but maybe he's saying Mephibosheth is currently eating at my table as if he was one of the king's sons. In other words, I'm treating him like royalty.
Royally.
Yeah. Go on, Paul.
So he carries on to read, right, not the translation, but he carries on that sentence. I've always treated him with respect, and I've never ridiculed him. I admit that I was afraid to claim his rights on his behalf, but now I'm happy to return all of his property.
Okay, so that's excellent. So Rav Steinsaltz is saying on the lines of what I've just said, which I hadn't thought of until you said that, and I think that's a pretty good explanation. And note, by the way, that it is dependent. That explanation is dependent on an accurate translation of the words Mephibosheth ochel al shulchani, which is present tense. Look at the translation on the screen. He shall eat. That's not what it says. Because if it was shall eat, it would be
Yochal.
Come on.
Yochal.
Yochal. Yes, yochal. He shall eat. It's not what it says. So Rav Steinsaltz, kol hakavod, has translated it accurately, and as a result of that, has given us what I think is a fairly decent explanation. There are other explanations, which I'm going to tell you one of now by asking Jeffrey to now read that pasuk again from the art scroll, but include the brackets. But tell us what's bracketed.
And Ziva said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servants, so shall your servant do. In brackets, David repeated, Mephibosheth will be eating at my table like one of the king's sons.
Okay, so we have inserted there a completely different consequence of events, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Explanation.
Sequence.
The way it runs. Sequence, that's the word I'm looking for. Sequence of events. Completely different sequence of events. Ziva says, yes, your majesty, I'll do exactly as you please. And David says, and Mephibosheth, don't you even think about starting with him, because he's going to eat at my table as if he was one of the king's sons. But it doesn't say that. Nowhere in this pasuk does it say Va'amar David or David Amar or whatever it is. We're not told this at all.
That would be pointless. That would be pointless because he's already said he's going to eat at my table. Why repeat it again?
I think that's why Jeffrey read in brackets. Read the brackets again, Jeffrey, please.
David repeated.
Repeated, right? Yeah, but it's not there. You're right, Michael. It's not there. And I personally don't like that explanation. I don't like it when they insert something which changes the whole sequence of events. I have to say I was struggling until Paul pointed out the Steinsaltz. I was struggling to find an explanation that I personally was comfortable with, but I knew I wasn't comfortable with the art scroll. Not because it was art scroll. I didn't know it was there in art scroll, but the Mefarshim, they've not made it up in art scroll. There are Mefarshim that say that's what it was meant by this pasuk, and in fact, the explanation quoted by Rav Bazak brings a whole bunch of other places in Tanakh where it's obvious that somebody else is speaking and it's not written clearly. And I went and looked at them all, and I didn't think any of them were worthy of bringing to your attention. So I didn't get them ready on the screen because I didn't like the explanation altogether.
Jonathan,
yes, Jackie. Yes,
possible
Jackie.
That after he says, so your servant shall do, it's David speaking, as for measure that he should eat at my table as one of the king's sons.
That is exactly what we're talking about now. That's what Jeffrey inserted in his brackets. And that's what I don't like, because it doesn't say that in the Hebrew. They made it up.
But Ziva's not a king, so he's...
Exactly. So the
David
whole
is.
thing is difficult. I think that Rav Steinsaltz's explanation is brilliant, and that is the one I'm going to recommend to you, as it were. The idea being, I'll do everything that you've said. One sec. I'll do everything that you've said, and I want you to know that I've always treated Mephibosheth well. Don't think that I've been awful to him, because obviously Ziva can see which side his bread's buttered on now, right? He knows that King David is going to look after Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth is now King David's favored relative. Ziva knows he's not a fool. He wants to be on the right side of David. So he says, don't think that I've sticked out him somewhere else. No, I haven't. I've always been good to him. He's eating at my table. Not only is he eating at my table, I treat him royally. And so I think that's a great explanation. Yes, Hannah?
There's a thought in the back of my mind that maybe he's saying this to David. Yeah, I've never ridiculed him. I've treated him well. He's eating at my table, because he wants to try and put distance between David and Mephibosheth. He understands that if Mephibosheth eats at David's table, David's going to have first-hand knowledge of what's going on with the property and how he's behaving towards Mephibosheth, how Ziva's behaving towards him, what's happening with the lands and that. And maybe in the back of his mind, Ziva still wants to put some distance between Mephibosheth and David. So he's saying he'll keep on eating at my table.
I think that's a fair comment. However, the only flaw I think in that, I mean, it's a very cogent argument. The only flaw is it's a bit of a chutzpah for a servant to say to the king, you don't need to have him at your table. I'll have him at my table. And the way he says it, he doesn't say, please, my master, can I still look after Mephibosheth because I love him so much? He says, Mephibosheth ochel al shulchani. It's a good explanation, but
we know
he's got some nerve. He's got some nerve if he does that.
Johnny.
But we know that he's got...
One second, Hannah. Iva.
Data Mikra jumps straight to Pasuk Yud Gimel 13, where it says black and white that Mephibosheth, his land that he owned was not spread across the whole country as Shaul's was. His was centered around Jerusalem. He lived in Jerusalem, and he continuously ate at the king's table.
I don't think that's what it means, Iva. Let's get to that when we get to verse 13 in a couple of minutes. But I don't think that's what it means. I don't think that's what 13 means. We'll come back to it.
So.
Okay, well, I can. I'll give an alternative explanation. Yeah, but I think this is after the event. I'll tell you what I think about that in a minute when we get to it. Yes, Hannah.
We know that Ziva's got a chutzpah. He took his first chutzpah is that he laid claim to Mephibosheth's holdings without asking anybody. He just took over, and he put Mephibosheth out over there, and he claimed it all for himself, all the produce and all the everything. So we know he's got a chutzpah, and maybe he's just trying it on.
Maybe. I
can't say, like the modern Israelis, you give it a try.
I can't say that the explanation is wrong, because it's definitely got something to recommend it. I like it. I'm very happy that we've had this discussion, because when I was preparing this year, I didn't really know what to make of this pasuk. All I knew was I wasn't happy with the insertion of David as the speaker for the end of the pasuk. It's just too easy, and I don't like it. But I do like Hannah's, and I do like Rav Steinsaltz. Let's move on.
Johnny,
I want to get...
Johnny,
yes, David.
Can I just defend Rashi here? It's Rashi's explanation that you're not comfortable with. There's a very interesting Ramban at the end of Parshas Chayei Sarah. And he said that this is a grammatical phenomenon because there's an ambiguity in our pasuk in Shmuel Bet. It says, and he said twice. So there's the possibility it might have been one, it might have been another person. And he gives other examples of this phenomenon. Vayavo ha'ish habayita, where ha'ish is mentioned twice in the same pasuk. And it's ambiguous. Is this referring to Lavan or Eliezer? Another one with Joseph and his brothers, when it says they drew him out of the pit. Is it talking about the Midyanim or the brothers? And he said, where there's this ambiguity, you've got the possibility of two people speaking or two people acting in the same pasuk.
Okay, so that's what I was referring to, and I said I saw all those. And I didn't like any of them, and I'll tell you why I didn't like any of them, because none of those refer to speech. They refer to ambiguities in the pasuk. So, for example, I thought of another one, a very famous one. I'm sure you'll remember it. In Sefer Bereshit, when
2 minutes to 11.
When Yaakov comes to meet Yosef, and it says he fell on his neck and he cried, and it's very unclear whose was falling on whose neck, right? Yeah. That's a very famous one, and I don't have any problem with that at all. That's ambiguous, probably deliberately. Here, I don't see any ambiguity in this pasuk. Having said that, David, if it would have said before the words Mephibosheth ochel al shulchani, if it would have said again Vayomer and he said, then you've got the opportunity to say, well, that's somebody else speaking. But this is clearly, as I see it, one sentence spoken by Ziva to the king. Ziva says to the king, I'll translate it into English, into my English. Vayomer Ziva el HaMelech, Ziva said to the king, all that the king will command, my master the king will command, et avdo, his servant, Ken yaseh, so yaseh avdecha, so your servant will do, Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth ochel is eating al shulchani, on my table. There's no ambiguity there. The the vav, joins the previous part of the pasuk. I don't see any ambiguity in there at all. And that's why I said what I said earlier, David, that those are examples that Rashi gave, and they're also quoted by the Radak, by the way. I'm not buying them. It doesn't fit with this pasuk, in my humble opinion. But there you go. Art Scroll obviously always follows Rashi. Art Scroll will always, if there's a Rashi explanation, that's fine. And that's why in Jeffrey's Art Scroll, that's why it's got and David repeated in brackets, which is not there. So it's a very, very fascinating pasuk, which if we just, glossed over it, we would have missed a lot of nuance. And I think it's, I think that for me has summed up the way we learn. Or the way I like to learn, I like to teach, if you like, because I think we get so much more out of it that way. And I really enjoyed that discussion just now. Let's go on, because I want to get to Michael Krause's Divrei Hayomim. Yes, David.
The Ramban is pointing out the ambiguity is the word my. So my table, my servant. And that's how he raises the possibility that we're talking about two different people.
My servant. Where does it say my servant?
Adoni hamelech el avdo ken yaseh avdecha ochel al shulchani. My table, my servant. That's Ramban's question.
Doesn't say my servant. It says my master.
Sorry, my master, not my servant. So my master and my table could be two different people.
I would argue I would argue against that, because as is very common, Ziva, or I suppose that this might be a support for what he's saying. Ziva, no, I don't agree. I think Mephibosheth is speaking about his own table, because he doesn't refer to the king in the second person, as is very common. You refer to His Majesty, right? It's a very common thing. I used to hate it when the SEM girls used to come into my surgery, and they would say to me, "What does Dr. Lieberman think about this?" They would never use the word "you," right? It's not considered respectful, and it was really off-putting. And it was even more off-putting when they used to bring the big rebbes in. Whenever there was a big rebbe in town in Manchester who was visiting, and inevitably they'd get sick, and then they'd bring them into my surgery, and I would see them, and I would have to say, "Could the rebbe please tell me where the rebbe's pain is?" And I was so busy concentrating on not saying "you" and saying "the rebbe" that I didn't even take any notice of the answers, because I was working out what I was going to say next. And in the end, I used to just give up and just say "you," because I couldn't handle it. But here, this is what Ziva's doing. He says, his master, he says, "My master, the king, will, whatever he will command, his servant." He doesn't say "your servant." So when he says "al shulchani," I think he's talking about himself. But anyway.
Whose table are we referring to in verse 10? Yochal tamid lechem al shulchani.
That's the king speaking. So the king is referring to his own table.
I think that's another support for Ramban. That it's not Mephibosheth that's saying he's eating at my table. It's David saying that.
So how do you explain the lack of Vayomer David?
Yeah.
And more importantly, how do you explain the Vav HaChibur after the Etnachta of Avdecha? U Mephibosheth ochel al shulchani.
I have to ask Ramban.
Okay,
next time I see him.
Next time you see Ramban, just ask him that from me. Okay. Now, so excellent. Oh, we're never going to get to Divrei Hayomim today. Go on, Hannah. Last one before we get to Divrei Hayomim. Promised Michael would get to Divrei Hayomim. Come on.
My question keeps rattling in my mind is, how does Ziva keep saying Mephibosheth will eat on my table when David's just supposed to have given Mephibosheth back all his lands? How does Ziva still see himself as the great man with all this produce and all this money and all this land when he should be eating at Mephibosheth's table?
Good question, and I'll answer it with your own answer. He's got chutzpah.
Okay. So that supports the idea that he really has got chutzpah.
Yeah, it does. But I think it possibly also supports Rav Steinsaltz's view that the explanation is different, and that is that Ziva is trying to cover his back for what he might have done to Mephibosheth in the past by trying to persuade David that he's treated him well. For me,
he was being careful, because otherwise David was known to have a nasty temper. He might have killed Ziva if he didn't behave himself.
Absolutely, that is definitely true. He was a redhead, and he was hot-tempered. We know that. Yeah. So we've got various explanations. We've got Rashi, we've got the Ramban, we've got Rav Steinsaltz, we've got Rav Hannah. We've got all of these explanations, and you can.
Excuse me.
Sorry, what did you say, David?
Rebbitzin, not Rav Hannah.
Rebbitzin Hannah, yeah, Rebbitzin Hannah. And you pays your money, you takes your choice. You can choose which one you like the most. The important thing is that we've thought about it and we've got something out of it. Excellent. Right, now, I promised Michael Krauss that we would get to his favorite book, Divrei Hayomim, and now we're going to do so. Verse 12. Now, just before we read verse 12, let's just draw breath and see where we're up to. David has said, is there anybody that I can be kind to through Jonathan? Ziva is brought along. Mephibosheth is schlepped back from Lo Davar. He's at the king's table. all is well. Ziva is now returned to his correct station as a servant, and that's where we're holding. And we take breath, and the chapter tells us, verse 12, Jeffrey.
Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all of Ziba's household were servants to Mephibosheth.
Stop there. Mephibosheth had a small son, Ben Katan, a small son. You said young son. Here it says small son. Okay, could mean young, could be young. And his name was Micha. Why are we told that? Why are we told that right now? What's the implication? First of all, what do we know about Mephibosheth?
Mephibosheth was crippled, and it establishes that there's still a line of heritage after Mephibosheth.
Yes, exactly. What we might think is that because Mephibosheth is a Nebuch, right? You might think that he didn't have any descendants. The Tanakh is telling us very clearly that he did have a descendant, and his name was Micha. Now, Michael Krauss, if you wanted to know who Micha's descendants were, where would you look?
No, Divrei Yamim.
Well done, Divrei Yamim. That's where you'd look. There we go. Now then, we're going to come into the bit that I put off, that David Marks was directing me to out of the Koran here.
What chapter?
We are on chapter Divrei Yamim, chapter 8. Divrei Yamim 1, Aleph, chapter 8, verse 34 to 40. I'm not going to ask Jeffrey to read this because it's very difficult, because it's all weird names. But you can read it for yourself on the screen. Jonathan's son was Meriv Baal, and Meriv Baal begot Micha. Now, what does that tell us about Mephibosheth?
He wasn't the father of Micha.
Okay. That could be the one explanation, Peter, that actually Divrei Yomim is telling us that this Micha, which our chapter tells us was the son of Mephibosheth, was actually the son of somebody else. It does happen, you know.
Yeah.
What is another explanation?
Is that Micha the prophet? Johnny, is that Micha the prophet?
Well, one second, Philip. Come to you in a second, Philip.
Okay.
Peter said that there's another Micha. Yeah. Okay, that's another explanation we could be having.
They had a different name as well. Changed his name.
Paul says that Meriv Baal is the same person as Mephibosheth. Is that what you were saying, Philip?
No, I was asking if Micha was the prophet Micha.
No.
Okay.
Right, let's go with Paul. Let's go with Paul's theory. Okay. Now we have some precedent that we can bring to bear here. What does Baal mean? What does it refer to?
Idolatry.
Idolatry, yes. It does mean owner. Owner in modern Hebrew, it means owner. It can also mean husband. But in biblical Hebrew, Baal was traditionally the idol. Baal was the name of the idols. And so the name Baal was a little bit of a shameful name. Very interesting, actually. Just as an aside, I read something recently about somebody in America who'd written something about how this particular person, this guy, was not going to be forced into hiding his Jewish identity, and he, because of all the marches and all the stuff that was going on wherever he lived in California or wherever it was, he was going to come out and proudly display his Jewish identity. I thought, wow, that's kol hakavod to you. And then I looked at the name of the guy, and the name of the guy was Christopher something. And I thought, that's a bit odd. I thought, that's a bit strange. Why, you're obviously a proud Jew. Why would, if you're a Baal Tshuva, you'd expect, you change your name to Chaim or something. What's going on here? Anyway, turns out, kol hakavod to Christopher, whatever his name was, turns out not only is he a convert, he's a black convert, and his other name was something unpronounceable. He was clearly a black Afro-American guy who'd converted and was very proudly supporting Israel, and kol hakavod to him. But the name was what struck me. So why am I telling you that now? Because you wouldn't want, in your writing Shmuel, you wouldn't want to be calling people by the name Baal. And so they often changed the name Baal to something else. What did they change it to?
Boshet.
Boshet. Give me an example, Paul, which we already know about.
Ishboshet.
Yes, excellent. Ishboshet is called in Divrei Hayamim. Have a guess.
Ishbaal.
Ishbaal, correct. Baal and Boshet seem to be interchangeable.
Boshet is shame. Boshet means shame.
Boshet is shame, that's right. So, you don't want to be called Baal because that's idolatrous. They changed it to Boshet. That's how they did it. So,
can I make a comment?
One sec. I've got to finish the thought process. Mariv Baal is Mariv Boshet. Very, very similar to Mephi-Boshet. They are one and the same people. Paul's explanation is that Mariv Baal and Mephi-Boshet are one and the same, just different names, because Divrei Hayamim would use what was his original name, and Shmuel would use his more polite name. But before I go to Hannah, I just want to read the rest of this lot. So Mephi-Boshet gives birth to Micha. Micha then has Piton, Melech, Ta'areya, and Achaz. Achaz then gets Yehoiada, and he gets Alamet, Azamavet, Zimri, and then Zimri gets Motzah, Motzah gets Bina, etc., 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 until we get to 39. And the sons of Ashek, his brother Ulam, his firstborn, Yeush, the second, and Eliphelet, the third. And then verse 40, Jeffrey, please.
And the sons of Ulam were mighty warriors who draw the bow, with many children and grandchildren, 150. All these were the sons of Benjamin.
Okay, let's stop there.
Johnny, can I just say
one sec, Philip, one sec. All those were the sons of Benjamin. Actually, all those were the sons of whom?
Mephi-Boshet.
They were the sons of Mephi-Boshet. That's right. All of those mighty warriors were the sons of Mephi-Boshet. So what can we learn? Go back to Shmuel Aleph. What do we learn from this pasuk that Mephi-Boshet had a small son, a little snip? I'll come to you in a minute, Philip. You can put your hand down. He had this little snip called Micha, and from this little snip called Micha, we got mighty warriors. Now then, just to complete the circle, I want to show you, if I can, what we had when Shaul and Jonathan are described as. Sure, I got this ready here. Hang on. No, that's a different one. No, that's a different one as well. There's Ishboshet, by the way. Right, Ishboshet, this is earlier on. I can't just put my hands on it now, but there is a pasuk which I can't put my hands on because I've got too many ready. But there's a pasuk that describes Shaul and Yonatan as Giborei Chayil, mighty warriors. What are these here described as? These sons of Mephibosheth, eventually these descendants of Mephibosheth, Anashin Giborei Chayil. The full circle comes round. Shaul and Yonatan were described as Anshei Chayil and Giborei Chayil. Exactly the same description is given to their great-great-great-great-grandchildren. And it all came because Mephibosheth had a little snip called Micha. So it's that little pasuk there, we could have just glossed over it, is telling us that a lame cripple Mephibosheth eventually, as a result maybe of David's kindness to him, bringing him back into the fold. We don't know whether he had a son before or after this, but either way, they were the progenitors of a mighty warriors. Okay, we're over time, so I'm just going to go to Philip, and then I was just bear with me for a couple of minutes after Philip, because I want to finish verse 13, finish the chapter, and I speak about what Ivor spoke about in a minute ago. Yes, Philip.
Not to say anything.
Okay, Philip first, and then Hannah. Come on, Philip.
Strangely enough, there's a very famous Israeli popular song about somebody called Eliphelet. I don't know if Eliphelet has any history here, because his name is just mentioned, but for some reason, Eliphelet, I've never heard the name being given to an Israeli child before, was a popular song about 25 years ago.
Okay, no idea. That's homework for you, Philip. Find out what was the Tanakh story of Eliphelet, this one here in our Divrei Hayamim, and find out whether the song has got anything to do with it. That's your homework. Yes, Hannah.
Okay.
I'm not disagreeing with anything about Mephibosheth's name change. I'm not. I'm only just pointing out that later in the story, there's a conflict between Ziva and Mephibosheth, and David reallocates the land. And if you take Baal to mean owner, and Meriv Baal is the owner of the conflict, it can also explain the difference in name in Divrei Hayamim to Shmuel Bet.
Interesting. So you're turning on its head and saying Mephibosheth was his original name, and Meriv Baal is the name he got later on after the. Yeah. Okay. Maybe. Could be.
Another comment. Just a comment. Yeah. Where you said earlier in the shiur, where it says Hamelech David, it's David in his official position, and David is just David in his private life. We see that also in Megillat Esther, where God's name is not mentioned, but the tradition says that where it says Hamelech Achashverosh, it's God, and where it just says Achashverosh, it's the human being, Achashverosh.
Not quite. You've got that a bit mixed up. Where it says Hamelech without Achashverosh, it means God.
It's king. Yeah, it means God.
And where it says Hamelech Achashverosh, it means Achashverosh. So when it just says Hamelech, it means God. Yeah, very good. Okay, let me come to verse 13. It says, verse 13, Jeffrey, please.
Well, on the screen it says, and Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame on both his feet.
So Ivor, quoting that Mikra, wants to say that all of Mephibosheth's property was in Jerusalem because that's where he was. That's what you want to say, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, it's further. It says, even though the fields of Shaul were all over the country, Mephibosheth had a permanent residence in Jerusalem because he ate at the king's table as one of the children of the king, and he's lame and lame on 2 legs. That's the translation.
Okay. All right. So we're not saying different things. I thought you were saying that he had originally had property in Jerusalem, because that isn't right. He may well have been given property in there, but what you're saying is because he ate continually at the king's table. So that can only mean afterwards, which is what I was going to point out. Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem only after these events, because where did he dwell before that? Lo Davar. Yeah, Ala Shvatzi Yoren, right? Yenavelt he lived in. Now he lives in Jerusalem. So this can only be afterwards. I thought that you were quoting different there. No,
Jonathan,
this is correct. Yes, Jackie.
So Ziva has to look after all his property anyway. If he's in Jerusalem and his property's not in Jerusalem, then Ziva's still got to look after it all for him.
Yeah, but the difference is that he's now got David to make sure that Ziva doesn't, pilfer it all.
Appropriate
or misappropriate. Yeah. Right. Very good. Okay, we've finished the chapter, and we will start chapter 10 next week.
Why does he repeat him being a cripple at the end?
I think he repeats in the cripple for 2 reasons. I thought that question as well, but I thought we're out of time. But since you've asked it, we'll answer it. Those that need to leave. I think it says it for 2 reasons. One, because it stresses the kindness of David, which is what this chapter is all about. This chapter is all about the Hakarat HaTov of David to Jonathan, looking after Jonathan's offspring. Again, I remind you that this took place in a time not in the the woke 21st century where you're not even allowed to use the word cripple anymore. This took place in a time where people who were lame on both feet would have been sent out to pasture or whatever. No, he ate at the king's table, and I think you would be justified in putting the word despite the fact that he was lame on both his feet. That's what I think it's doing there, number 1. And number 2, I think is telling us because he was lame on his feet, a bit like what Jackie just said, he needed somebody to make sure that his property elsewhere, because he can't go and look after his property himself because he's lame. So somebody else, i.e. the house of David, were responsible for making sure that Ziva behaved himself. So I think that's why I think it's repeated there. Yes, Jeffrey.
The other thing is that the tribe of Benjamin is very close to Jerusalem. It's sort of northwest of Jerusalem. The tribe of Judah was south of Jerusalem. So they were very close neighbors.
Yeah, Jerusalem actually, what's the word? Sits on the border of Jerusalem, of Yehuda and Binyamin. You're quite right. Traverses. Yes, thank you. Struggling with my words today. Thank you for helping me out. Right, all time to go. Next week we'll start chapter 10, which is a very interesting chapter. They're all very interesting chapters, but this is another different chapter. This was a standalone chapter, which is why I wanted to finish it today. But I think we've learned a lot from this chapter. We've learned a lot about David's personality. We've learned a lot that you never write off a lame person, because their descendants can become Anshe Gibor Chayil, and we can see that the butler is not always what he makes himself out to be. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov.
Bye.
Is there a share tonight?
Say that again.
Is there a share tomorrow